5,126 times, a man in a workshop behind his house built a machine, switched it on, and watched it fail. 5,127 was the one that worked. It took him more than 5 years. Along the way, he borrowed against his home, fell deeply into debt, and watched his savings disappear while his wife paid the bills with her salary as an art teacher. Every vacuum cleaner company he showed it to said no. Some of them said no twice. The product he was building threatened a business those companies could not afford to lose. So they refused to make it, refused to license it, and in some cases simply waited for him to run out of money. He very nearly did. This is the story of how James Dyson spent 15 years turning a small annoyance, a vacuum cleaner that kept losing suction, into one of the most valuable privately held companies on Earth. Not through genius, through stubbornness, debt, and a refusal to accept that the experts were right. James Dyson was born in 1947 in a small town on the coast of Norfolk, England. His father died of cancer when James was 9, and he was sent away to boarding school, where he grew up feeling like an outsider. He was not an obvious engineer. He studied art, first at a drawing school in London, then at the Royal College of Art, where he drifted toward furniture and interior design before falling in love with engineering. His first real product was not a vacuum, it was a wheelbarrow. Frustrated that ordinary wheelbarrows sank into soft ground and tipped over, he replaced the front wheel with a wide plastic ball. He called it the ball barrow, and it sold well. But Dyson made a mistake that would haunt him and teach him everything. The patents were owned by the company, not by him. When the investors pushed him out of his own business, he walked away with nothing to show for the invention. He swore he would never let that happen again. The idea that would define his life started with irritation. At home, Dyson owned a Hoover Junior, a respected top-of-the-line vacuum cleaner. And like every vacuum of its era, it had a flaw he could not ignore. The moment its bag began to fill, it lost suction. Not at the end, when the bag was full, almost immediately. He took it apart to find out why, and saw the problem at once. A vacuum cleaner bag is not really a bag, it is a filter. Air has to pass through its walls to leave the machine, but the instant a fine layer of dust coats the inside of those walls, the pores clog. The air can no longer escape easily, and the suction collapses. The bag was sabotaging the machine the moment you started using it. Every manufacturer on Earth knew this. None of them had fixed it, because the bag was not a flaw to them. It was the business. If this is the kind of story you enjoy, subscribe. There are a lot more builds like it here. The answer came from a completely different industry. Around this time, Dyson noticed something at a local sawmill that processed timber near his factory. To clear the air of sawdust, the mill used a giant cone-shaped tower called a cyclonic separator. It spun the dusty air at enormous speed, and the heavier dust particles were flung outward and downward, dropping out of the air stream. No bag, no filter, nothing to clog. The air came out clean. Dyson stood there and asked the obvious question. If a 30-foot industrial cyclone could pull sawdust out of the air without a filter, could a tiny one do the same thing inside a vacuum cleaner? That night he tore the bag off his Hoover, taped a cardboard cone in its place and tried it. It worked. The suction did not fade. He had, in a single evening, sketched the idea that would eventually upend a century-old industry. What he did not yet understand was how many years, and how much money, stood between that cardboard cone and a machine he could actually sell. A working idea is not a working product. Between that cardboard cone and a vacuum cleaner, anyone would lay 5 years of relentless grinding failure. Dyson moved his family to a farmhouse, set up a workshop in the old coach house behind it, and began building prototypes by hand. He changed one variable at a time, the angle of the cone, the diameter, the airflow, the materials, and tested each version. Most of them failed. He built 5,127 of them. Each failure taught him one tiny thing, and he kept careful notes on every single one. The money ran out fast. He borrowed against the family home and took on debt that climbed past £2 million. His wife, Deirdre, kept the family afloat on her income as an art teacher and gave painting lessons in their kitchen. There were years when they had no idea whether any of it would ever pay off. By the time prototype 5,127 worked the way he wanted, Dyson was deep in debt and out of patience with the industry he was about to challenge. Now he needed a manufacturer. Dyson did what any inventor would do. He took his bagless vacuum to the biggest names in the industry and offered to license it. He approached Hoover. He approached Electrolux. He flew across the Atlantic to pitch the American giants. The machine demonstrably worked. It picked up more dust than any vacuum on the market and never lost suction. And one by one, every single company turned him down. The rejections did not make sense to him at first. They were not telling him the product was bad. They were not pointing to a flaw in the engineering. They simply were not interested in a vacuum cleaner that needed no bag. For a man who had spent 5 years and his entire financial life proving the idea worked, it was baffling. Why would an industry refuse a machine that was plainly better than anything it sold? The answer, when he finally understood it, told him everything about how that industry actually made its money. Here is what James Dyson had missed. The vacuum cleaner companies were not really in the business of selling vacuum cleaners. They were in the business of selling bags. Every machine they sold created a customer who had to come back again and again to buy replacement bags forever. In the United Kingdom alone, that replacement market was worth around £100 million a year. Across the world, it was worth far more. A bagless vacuum did not just compete with their machines. It threatened to vaporize the most profitable, most reliable revenue stream they had. He was not offering them an upgrade. He was offering them a way to destroy their own golden goose. So they did the rational thing. They said no, and they kept selling bags. Years later, a senior Hoover executive admitted the truth on television. He said the company regretted not buying the cyclone technology, not to use it, but to bury it, so no one else could. The better machine was a threat to be contained, not a product to be sold. With every Western manufacturer against him, Dyson looked east. In 1986, a Japanese company called Apex agreed to license his cyclonic design and manufacture it for the Japanese market. They called it the G-Force. It was bright pink, it looked like nothing else on the market, and it was wildly expensive, selling for the equivalent of around $2,000. In Japan, it became a status symbol. People bought it precisely because it was strange and costly and brilliantly engineered. In 1991, the G-Force won a major international design prize. More importantly, the royalties from those sales finally gave Dyson something he had not had in years: money. Not a fortune, but enough to keep going. Enough to start dreaming of the thing he had wanted from the very beginning, ever since investors pushed him out of the wheelbarrow company. He did not want to license his invention to someone else anymore. He wanted to build it himself, sell it himself, and own every patent. The Lifeline from Japan made that possible. In 1996, NVIDIA had 6 months of cash left and a chip architecture that was already obsolete. He opened his own research center and factory in England and began manufacturing his own vacuum cleaner under his own name. The machine was called the DC-01. It was not cheap, it cost more than almost every rival vacuum on the shelves. Retailers were skeptical. Conventional wisdom said British shoppers would never pay a premium for a vacuum cleaner, of all things from a brand nobody had heard of. He bet that they would, if the machine was obviously better. He made the cyclone visible, putting the swirling dust behind clear plastic so buyers could watch it work. He leaned into the very thing that made the product expensive: the engineering. There was no marketing budget to speak of. The machine had to sell itself on the shop floor, against established giants with century-old names and enormous advertising. Everything he had borrowed, built, and risked over 15 years now depended on whether ordinary people would reach for the unknown machine instead of the familiar one. They reached for it. Within 18 months, the DC-01 was the best-selling vacuum cleaner in the United Kingdom. It outsold the machines made by the very companies that had turned Dyson away, the ones that had decided his invention was too dangerous to make. Word of mouth did what advertising could not. People bought one, watched it pull out dust their old vacuum had left in the carpet for years, and told everyone they knew. The premium price stopped being a barrier and became a signal of quality. The thing the industry had sworn the public would never want became the thing the public wanted most. Within a few years, the company was selling vacuums across Europe, then in the United States, then around the world. The man who had been rejected by every major manufacturer was now beating all of them on their home ground. And he had done it without a single bag, which meant every machine he sold quietly killed a little more of the replacement bag business the giants had been so desperate to protect. The giants did not take it quietly. As his machines took over the market, Hoover, the company whose own vacuum had inspired the whole idea, released a bagless cleaner of its own, using a system Dyson said copied his patented cyclone technology. He sued. The case ground through the British courts, and in the year 2000 he won. The court ruled that Hoover had infringed his patent, and he was awarded several £1 million in damages. It was the vindication of everything. The patents he had fought to own ever since the wheelbarrow, the years of debt, the 5,000 prototypes. The same industry that had refused to make his machine, then tried to copy it, was now paying him for the privilege. He took the damages from that case, and in a gesture nobody missed, put much of it toward engineering education and design. The inventor the experts had dismissed had not only beaten them in the market, he had beaten them in court, and made them pay for the lesson. Most inventors get one good idea. Dyson treated the vacuum as a starting point. Having proved that better engineering could win against entrenched giants, he aimed the same approach at one ordinary object after another. He looked at the public hand dryer, slow, weak, useless, and built the air blade, which scraped the water off your hands with a sheet of high-speed air in seconds. He looked at the electric fan, unchanged for a century, and removed the blades entirely, pushing air through a hollow ring instead. He built robot vacuums, air purifiers, and lighting. Then he turned to hair, spending hundreds of millions developing a hairdryer with the motor and the handle. A machine so over-engineered for such a mundane task that it became a luxury icon. The pattern never changed. Find a product everyone had stopped thinking about, ask why it worked so badly, and rebuild it from the motor up. The company poured enormous sums into research, employing thousands of engineers, and guarded its patents fiercely. He had become exactly what the industry once refused to let him be, a manufacturer. Not every bet paid off, and Dyson, to his credit, has never pretended otherwise. In 2017, the company announced its most ambitious project yet, a Dyson electric car. It was not a gimmick. They hired hundreds of engineers, designed a real vehicle from scratch, built working prototypes, and committed enormous sums to making it real. And in 2019, after spending around £500 million of the company's own money, they cancelled it. The reason was simple and brutal. They could build the car. They could not build it at a price anyone would pay while still making a profit, not against established automakers with decades of scale. Rather than pour billions more into a machine that could sink the whole company, he killed the project and absorbed the loss. It was a painful, expensive failure, made entirely in public. But it was also the same instinct that had driven everything. A refusal to ship something that did not truly work, even after the world had been promised it. Sometimes the right engineering decision is to stop. Today, the company James Dyson started in a coach house with a cardboard cone as one of the largest privately held businesses to come out of Britain. It sells billions of dollars of machines a year, in scores of countries, and remains entirely owned by the founder and his family. No outside shareholders, no stock market, no investors who could ever push him out again. That, more than the money, may be the point. The man who lost his first company because he did not own its patents built his second one so that it could never be taken from him. He is now one of the wealthiest people in the United Kingdom with a fortune estimated in the tens of billions. But the number that still defines him is not his net worth, it is 5,127, the count of failures it took to reach a single success. He kept the early prototypes. He has said they are a reminder that failure is not the opposite of progress. Failure is how progress is made. Strip away the fortune and the global brand, and the story is almost absurdly simple. A man was annoyed that his vacuum cleaner kept losing suction. He found an answer in a sawmill, built 5,127 versions of it, went deep into debt, was rejected by every expert in the field, and refused to stop. It took 15 years between the first cardboard cone and the machine that finally bore his name. Every authority told him it could not be done, that the public would not pay, that the bag was here to stay, that he was wasting his life in a shed. They were all wrong, and he had the prototypes to prove it. James Dyson did not have a secret. He had patience, debt, an art teacher wife who believed in him, and 5,127 attempts. He built one of Britain's great companies out of pure refusal, from nothing. If you want to see how more impossible things actually got built, subscribe.